Hello everyone, this is Gerard Oosterwijk. I'm the Digital Policy Analyst at FEPS, and you're listening to FEPS Talks, the podcast of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, the think tank of the progressives in Brussels. And today we have a special guest. We have Cecilia Rikap with us. She is at the University College of London, Head of Research and Associate Professor in Economics at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, the mission-driven institute, I would say. Cecilia, welcome here in Brussels. We had a quite intense day already with a lot of discussion, so thank you for taking the time to be here with us. Maybe you want to introduce yourself a little bit further if you want to add something.
Sure, with pleasure. First of all, thanks for the invite. I'm so pleased to be here and also to have this conversation to further unpack a bit not only the ideas of what I've been thinking in terms of digital sovereignty and why it's key for Europe, but also more broadly to discuss with you about my research. And just like in one sentence, I would say that I study power dynamics in the co-production and appropriation of different forms of knowledge. And this has led me, of course, to pay a lot of attention to the dynamics of digital technologies and how more and more our societies are being constrained by a digital technology that is controlled by a few companies from the US and secondarily China, instead of being enabled and empowered by technologies that we can collectively steer.
So that's also, we had the presentation today, the Reclaiming Digital Sovereignty. So you have a nice report out, not only you, there's many authors on there, and it was really like a group of people. You explained to me as well that you work with more as a network. And I also like the subtitle because I think that's where we're going to discuss, as well. FEPS, we have been working a lot on this, the digital sovereignty. I think it has been a buzzword. It can also be called strategic autonomy. Europe is very dependent on big tech, and that's a problem. So how do we become more autonomous, make our own decisions? But the subtitle is a roadmap to build a digital stack for people and for planet. But maybe to go through these words, because can you explain a little bit a digital stack for the audience that doesn't know what the tech stack means? How would you explain a digital stack?
Absolutely. Sometimes we use a synonymous to that, which is AI value chain. And people are perhaps more familiarized with the idea of a value chain or a production network. Ultimately, the AI stack refers to everything that is needed to produce artificial intelligence. And this will go like, basically there are three key components of the artificial intelligence that we have today, which is mainly machine learning, and within machine learning, a subgroup of AI models that are deep learning models. So the generative AI, the ChatGPT, they are part of this larger family of models. And these models, of course, require talent of AI scientists, AI engineers that will be coding. They also require a lot of people working on other parts of the development of the model. For instance, because AI wouldn't exist without data, and this is the second component, this data is not only being created collectively by society and then used for training the model, but also these data sets need to be cleaned, need to be tagged, and we have a lot of work that is associated with this fine-tuning process of the data. But I said that there were three components in this value chain. And the third one is what in the tech sector they would call compute. It's the material part, the hardware. And this hardware, this material part, and normally now we speak of data centers, but it's not just the data center, it's not just the processors. It also includes satellites, submarine cables. So it's everything that enables us to move data from one place to the other. And also everything that enables the training of the model. And the models are very energy driven. They consume a lot of energy. So behind all these processors, in particular, behind the processing power required to produce AI, we should also speak about the consumption of energy and water. So ultimately, producing AI requires a lot of things. And when we think of AI, we think it's something like non-human, and actually is much more human and nature-rooted than what we normally know.
It's not just the prompt, and I think your colleague as well, Edemilson Parena, he was there to present with us as well today. He mentioned the example, and I will repeat it now because the audience didn't, of course, listen this presentation, that one prompt of 1,000 words, if you ask ChatGPT to give you an answer of 1,000 words, it will be consuming as much water as a bottle of 500 milliliter. So one Evian bottle per question, and water is becoming scarce. So this is it's not only energy, and energy, we have solar panels, we have a lot of renewable energy, but I think everybody in the field knows, we have droughts, we have lack of fresh water. So if you are giving this machine of this ecosystem your water, if you're giving every question half a liter of water, be very careful with the questions you ask, or maybe we need a different kind of model. And is that also like for you the interesting thing, because you said, okay, we explained the stack, but is it right now not for people and planet?
Well, exactly. And that's the thing. Our report starts from a sort of like diagnosis of where this AI stack or AI value chain is. And if we go layer by layer, I mentioned that we need all this processing power. And these ultimately are chips, semiconductors. And the ones that are used for AI, these AI chips, are like the most of the market is controlled by NVIDIA. The most advanced AI semiconductors is NVIDIA, the one that designs it. Also, Amazon, Microsoft, Google have started designing these frontier AI semiconductors as well. And it's important to emphasize this design part because the foundry, the manufacturing of the semiconductor is done, of these ones in particular, which are the most advanced ones, is done only at the Taiwanese TSMC. One would think, okay, the knowledge is with NVIDIA of the semiconductor and TSMC has like the machines. But there is a lot of knowledge also encapsulated inside TSMC on how to ultimately produce the semiconductor. So these two companies control a lot of the knowledge to get the AI chip. But then we continue in the layers. And where is AI being developed? Where is AI being coded? Where are the models trained? And also, where is ChatGPT or whatever model, you name it, being offered as a service? And all this happens on the cloud. And the cloud is an extremely concentrated market. We have only 3 US companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, in that order, concentrating 70% of the global market. And actually, it's a decoupled market. Inside China, the main provider is Alibaba. So the concentration of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google in the rest of the world is even larger. And this is relevant not only, again, I insist, because this, I know it's complicated, because when we speak of the cloud, again, something immaterial, where's the materiality of the thing? And the cloud is not just about the material infrastructure. It's true that it is there where all the different chips are assembled, one next to the other. So imagine if you have a laptop, if you have a desktop computer, imagine thousands of all of them together, put together, and not just one next to the other, but interconnected. So in that place, you're not only going to be able to train the model or to store your data, because the cloud is also a platform, it's also a more immaterial layer on top of which all the models are developed, are coded. The cloud is the space where developers these days are coding the algorithms, where whatever service, be it AI or not, is more and more being developed. And it's also there, your supermarket for technology. More and more, it's imposing itself as the place where even states need to go and procure, go and buy if you want to get access to any digital technology, in particular AI. And people would say, but hey, what about OpenAI? Because you said Amazon, Microsoft, Google, but OpenAI is actually the company that has quote unquote developed, and I will unpack that in 1 second, but the ChatGPT. And it's true, but it did it with funding and with the push and with a lot of pressure coming from Microsoft. It was Microsoft the one that convinced OpenAI to stop developing GPT-4 at that time and use GPT-3, the model that it already had, to develop an application. And that application runs on Microsoft Azure, which is the cloud of Microsoft. So every time we are doing this search on ChatGPT, we are not only consuming one bottle of water, we are also making Microsoft win more money because everything lies on its cloud. And this is the important part, because in this ecosystem, in this value chain, we are more and more seeing AI startups popping up. But all of them, sooner or later, depend on the venture capital money, on the cloud as a space to sell their services that comes from Amazon, Microsoft, Google, eventually NVIDIA. And in China, there is a similar story. And this is why it ends up not being for people on the planet, because the technologies that are being developed are technologies for profits, are technologies that do not take into account the ecological footprint, that do not take into account the impact on labor. If these technologies are replacing labor, if these technologies are being used for surveillance, if they are being used for weaponry, these are not the priorities of our time. We have people that want to live a better life and to be able actually to have a meaningful job, to enjoy their life with their families and so on and so forth. And all that is sidelined. Even think of healthcare, think of education. Yes, there could be potential uses of AI, but the ones that now are being prioritized is use of AI to replace labor in education and make it cheaper. Use of AI to replace part of the labor in healthcare and make it cheaper, instead of empowering the physicians, making their lives better, the nurses. So this is also why it matters to repurpose the technology. So this is not a report against the technology. It's a report that tries to discuss about what type of technology we have and what type of technology we want and could have.
And I think that's also like, it's interesting what you mentioned, right? I have a lot of questions, a lot of like avenues where I could go into, but I think you mentioned the cloud. I know as well, like here in Europe, and I don't know like if this is something that you followed more closely, but there was an initiative for European cloud, the Gaia X. I don't know if you followed that, and it never really materialized. And I think it's also like, again, the capture also of big tech, because they went in, the big players went in and became part of it. So the idea was to create a European cloud. And then in the end, it died kind of in beauty because, you know, like there was a misunderstanding or it was sabotaged from the inside. I don't know like how cynical you have to look at it, but there was already 5 years ago that we identified this problem, and there has been a more and more concentration of power actually in the big hands. It's interesting as well that you say like OpenAI, it sounded like a foundation and we are all open, but actually it's Microsoft behind. Or also Elon Musk, I think, is also an OpenAI. Yeah? So there's different...
He was one of the original like people funding, and exactly. He left when Microsoft got in, actually.
Exactly. So it's the big power game, the big tech, the big five, the Microsoft's, Google, Amazon of this world that are playing this game, and they are to profit from it. And it's interesting what you mentioned about like the cloud maybe being as an entry point, but how would we get there? And maybe make it also to the link, because we need to also decide, it's also governments, for example. I know as well, like I'm from the Netherlands, I'm a Dutch citizen. I know that in the Netherlands, like, okay, you have a lot of cloud, even whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, but also just public service. You know, you cannot work anymore here at FEPS. We work on the cloud. You cannot do it differently anymore, especially if you're in a Microsoft environment. If you want to work with Outlook and Word, you are in the cloud. You are a Microsoft client, like OpenAI is Microsoft. You know, Microsoft Teams, everything is cloud. But how do we, you know, like, it's a bit weird that they are all dependent, that all of even our public sector is dependent on US big tech firms. But do you think also the procurement is one thing that we could go, or what is the concrete solution that you would offer to get, for example, to this European cloud? Like, how do we get there?
That's a crucial question, and I think it's definitely at the heart of our report. So the report starts with some key proposals for us, and the first one is precisely to redesign or rethink of a public-led digital stack, AI stack, and it may not be for every single service that it's out there, but it shall definitely be for procuring or for providing services to the state and the different public offices. And what do I mean by that? I mean that how can we make sure precisely that schools have digital services that are not dependent on a Microsoft or a Google? How do we make sure that a public hospital will have digital services that are not only a way to make their lives easier, but also really the technology is understood, is opened, the data is shared in a proper and anonymized way. And for all that, you need independence from these companies. And also these days, one must also say that from their governments, because actually these companies, they have been protected by the US government at different moments in time, and now we see it much more. So how can Europe build an alternative? And actually it needs to, in a way, replace part of these companies in these different layers. So there is already a discussion about the material infrastructure, the supercomputers, and with all this discussion about AI factories, for instance, in Europe. And this is an important step, but by itself is not enough, because basically what the AI factories want is to offer a space where companies, universities can train their AI models. But after you train it, if you want to offer it as a service, the only marketplace is the cloud of Amazon, Microsoft, Google. So what we propose in the report is, on top of course, making sure that there is a material infrastructure that is public-led, that is a public consortium at the EU level with all the member states, with audits from the civil society also, because you need to make sure that they are that, of course, no particular government at any moment in time will be sneaking into the data that is stored there. So this needs, of course, to have some proper audits. But on top of this material infrastructure, you need to build as well this sort of public marketplace where any startup, not only European startups, any company, any university can not just go and train or go and store, but can also then offer. You really create a market for technologies that leverages the playing field, because today the markets that exist are markets that are already levying a tax on every organization and make every organization dependent. There is no open protocol, there is no interoperability. So really, these companies control who knows what and how technologies are developed. Offering an alternative, at least for the services that the state will consume at a different level, I think is something that, of course, Europe can do at the technical level, and that is very much needed. And let me add one more thing about how this stack works that I didn't mention, which is the research that underlies all these layers. Because people usually think, okay, the ChatGPT, the knowledge was developed by OpenAI. But actually, it's not that simple. We have universities, public research organizations around the world, and specifically in Europe, dedicating years and years to the development of these technologies. And what happens afterwards is that all this knowledge ends up favoring the profits of a few companies. So it's not that Europe is not innovative. It's not that Europe is not creative. Europe is also investing a lot in knowledge, in science and technology, but the economic profits associated with that are harvested by a few companies, and the social benefits are completely downgraded, curtailed, because this knowledge, instead of serving the public purpose, it ends up serving the private profit of a few.
And I think it's very interesting, because like we know as well, you work at the university, many of us went to a university, especially here, like we have a lot of brains in Europe, a lot of investment, like horizon money, like there's like funding from the European Union, a lot of R&D, because we know that investing in research and investing in knowledge, we have a knowledge economy is a buzzword of a few years ago, maybe, but like this is the vision, the vision is there, and also the money is there. So public money is being poured in that, but then the private gains goes to these companies and not back to the public, because we paid with our taxes and they get it back. And I think this is also, you mentioned the US, they were protected also there, the big tech, but these innovations, and I think you work a lot with Mariana Mazzucato, I think as well. She has one article as well about the iPhone, how many components were developed with the defense industry in the US. Elon Musk, he might be a business genius and a genius in many ways, but it's not really an inventor. He didn't invent much. It's just like making a profit about putting it in your own interest rather than in the public interest. And to also mention like what you mentioned before, and it's a bit repeating what you just said, but they have the production. They are selling the service, is the marketplace, they control every aspect. It's not
and where we consume also.
Exactly. Like, so you are in one place, everything is in one hand, and there is no alternative.
No, exactly. There is no alternative. And this is why also we cannot just rely on or expect that a private company is suicidal for a private company, honestly, to do it. No private company, European private company, no matter how much money they receive in subsidies, they will simply not do it. This is already a very concentrated industry, but on top of that, the cloud generates economies of scale and scope. This results in a type of market structure where something that economists we call natural monopolization emerges. And this is also why competition doesn't work, because you, precisely speaking in Europe about competitiveness, you will lose it if you try to make it competitive. In order to have competition in the layers where you can have competition, and that will make more progress and also create jobs and so on and so forth. In order to enable and lock that part, you need to dismantle the bottleneck. And the bottleneck can only be dismantled with a public-led solution. And you were speaking about the Elon Musk, and I think this is very important because a lot of people are trapped in what a French scholar, Galuzzo, calls the myth of the entrepreneur. And the myth of the entrepreneur, why is it a myth? Because it forgets all the people that are collectively innovating. Entrepreneurs are not individuals. It's a society. It's an interconnected society. You were saying it. It's knowledge economy, knowledge society. It's about how systemically we produce the knowledge. And we can use the example of the iPhone just to emphasize the role of the state at that moment. But actually, it's just one actor among the many. We have the universities always contributing. We have the public research organization. We have the civil society contributing. And even in the digital economy, we even have every human being contributing with their data. So really, we need to have a space to say what technology we want for what and for whom.
Because it's very hyper individual as well. The surveillance capitalism model. So that's another one. It's about our data and how we're being surveilled. The data is an essential aspect, I think, as well. The data is being used from the internet to let this model run. It's another discussion we can have maybe after. But I think it's also what you mentioned about there is no choice. Right now, there is no alternative, because I want to throw in one example that we've seen as well. Like we had the AI Act. It was a big debate. I think you were here around like last time that was concluded. We had also the progressive movement in the front runner. Brando Benefé, an MEP from the Socialists, was running this report. The AI Act. Europe was the first to regulate AI. But then we've seen there was a lot of pushback. Mistral, to name one, Mistral AI. It was a French company, very close also to the French administration, the French government, which is how things work. And we have these European champions. There was another one, something with Alpha, I think, Aleph in Germany. So you could have a German and a French champion. But let's talk about the French champion, because we've seen. After the AI Act was agreed and they pushed back, they were like, "Don't regulate us. We need to innovate. Europe is gonna lose out if we don't be too strict on us. We need to compete." And then they go into the hands, indeed, of Microsoft, because they cannot do it without Microsoft. No. You know, and if you then read, so then you're like politicians and everybody is then like outraged, like, okay, they were lobbying against this, saying that they are the European alternative, and now like literally a month later they were running to the Americans to be with the Americans. But if I follow you, they didn't have a choice.
They didn't have a choice, and it's not that actually, if people want to know the true story, it's not that they were running to get the Americans. The Americans were running to get them, and actually, because they didn't have a choice, they had to accept it. So it's not a matter of your patriotism, how European you feel. It's really a matter of creating alternatives. Aleph, the other example, they finally decided that they are not going to develop frontier LLMs, that they're going to develop applications of the existing AI models. So you see, these are the two avenues. Either you just go for the applications, and you, of course, will use the models that are controlled by big tech. And where will these companies offer the digital services that are applications of the models also on these companies' clouds? Or you try to do your models, AI models, but eventually you will also have to offer them there. So really, the more I study this sector, the more I realize that this system doesn't work. And I understand, and I think we need to make also this clear, that it's definitely not against like people's freedom of speech. This is a bit far from what we're discussing, but I think that is relevant, because when we are speaking about giving more space to states, we want states not only because we think they can bring a solution, but also because regardless of all the flaws, these are democratically elected rulers, whereas big tech are rulers of our society today, but nobody elected them. So we may like more or less who is in power in our governments at the EU level, but these people were democratically elected, and we can push them and we can also make them accountable. They are responsible for their decisions. There is a space and there are ways to push them to be accountable. You were mentioning the AI Act, the DMA, the DSA. Now they need to be enforced, and we can push the European parliamentarians, or we can push also the European Commission directly to enforce all this, to push from their respective sides for enforcement. But this is because they were democratically elected and there is a way and a space to do it. This cannot happen when companies are the ones ruling.
And I totally get it there, because that's the problem, that Elon Musk is kind of like a tech monarch. Somebody who has he has the power and the power to decide, and the power to decide that his tweets, I still call it tweets on X. I don't follow Elon Musk, but I still have to see his tweets every day, because he decided that I have to see his tweets every day.
Exactly, and they decide what is
specific,
a news and what is not a news.
But he can also decide on his Starlinks, on his satellites. He can decide on the battlefield if the Ukrainians, they did something, and then he decides to turn off the internet in Ukraine. He can decide.
He can do it.
That's not democracy. That's not what we want. That's not what social democrats. So we are Democrats. That's not what we want, and we need to stop this somehow, or at least stop it in Europe. Like it's hard to stop it in the US. Like that's their business, but in Europe we need to.
And Europe can be also an inspiration for the rest of the world. That is neither the US nor China or Russia. I really think that there is a space for Europe to lead in a different way, in a democratic way, and to do it together with Latin America, with Africa, with other parts of Asia, really to try to find the different spaces, not only governments, but also the civil society, the scholars. I think we really have a lot of room for collectively thinking of a viable alternative that is good for people and the planet.
And I think to make this also a little bit in the perspective of the last legislative term, there was a lot of regulation, AI Act, DSA, DMA, Digital Data Act, Data Governance Act. So it's all these abbreviations, DJA, DSA, so people get lost. But that we were able to push back, and even also fines, there were a lot of fines also to the big tech companies, that we are pushing back. It shows also that people know, the politicians also know, the elected people know that big tech, it's US, it's not in our interest. They don't have many friends. They have a lot of money and deep pockets to do a lot of lobbying. Millions and millions spent to lobby and to push and to do whatever they can to stop it. But everybody knows that it's not in the interest of Europe. So I'm not always that negative about the potential that there is in Europe, or maybe also in Latin America. I don't know less about Latin America. But in Europe, there is a potential for a coalition that goes against this, because people know it's also not in the interest of European SMEs. So it's not an anti-business agenda. It's not an anti-government agenda. It's definitely not an anti-civil society agenda. It's very much a positive agenda, because they are only alone. They have a lot of power. They have a lot of money, but they don't have a lot of friends. So maybe that's also an interesting perspective. I want to finish on one thing very specific and concrete, because we went from the very broad view to very concrete. Because I saw today a list of the proposals that the Commission, we have a new European Commission, they started 1st of January, they're starting to work. And one of the first things that they will come up with is the AI factories. And I don't know exactly how it's going to look, but what do you think should be in there? What should make this AI factories proposal to success? What would you put in there? We also already discussed the cloud, but maybe it's something else. We already discussed also the knowledge institutions, all the research we have around Europe. We are able to do it, right? So what is your advice to the European Commission? Let us close on that. Like, what do you want to see in this AI factories proposal that will come out shortly?
What I would like to see there is at least a space, a quota for companies and universities that want to develop AI models or digital services for the state that will not go through big tech clouds. So even if they need to go directly through other channels, I think that there is a space, and Europe has the technical skills to do it. So if we can at least separate part of that processing power and prioritize solutions that are really addressing needs of the public sector, and that there is a commitment, a conditionality to then offer the service with interoperability, with as much as possible openness about the data used for training, what type of parameters were prioritized and what, and so on and so forth. I think that can already be a starting point. Is again, the AI factories shouldn't be only about training, but also a place for storing, using, and developing more technology.
So actually this alternative place where you can go with your services, where you can build on, the space needs to be created on the whole stack.
Yeah, but it's about connecting the AI factory with the European digital services marketplace. And I say European not because it's only for Europeans, but it's because it shall be or could be promoted by the EU. And I think that this complementarity needs to be taken into account, because if you put, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. If you put all the money only in one part of the stack, you will be reinforcing the status quo. You really need to unlock all the bottlenecks together, even if it's only for one tiny thing. Let's prioritize healthcare, or let's prioritize digital transition services, ecological transition services. In which way I mean this? Big tech companies are already offering a lot of services addressed for different issues related to the ecological breakdown. If it's for smart energy, or if it's for measuring how your water supply evolves, they are already with their data offering capacities to forecast weather and you name it. So because these companies are already offering services for the ecological transition, they're also positioning themselves as the ones that can steer the transition. If we can say one priority, the ecological transition, digital technologies for the ecological transition that can be trained in the AI factories, that can then be offered as a service with this public-led marketplace instead of going to Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. And of course, the state, the different member states, and if it's for ecological matters, the respective dependencies of the different countries will need to procure that service, because you need to assure demand. Otherwise, it makes no sense to force the company to train a service that no one will use in your marketplace. So I think that even if tiny, a complete alternative stack can be showcased afterwards as something that works, and on that basis, build larger solutions.
And I like that, because I think we need to be also realistic, right? To replace this whole ecosystem with billions, because we had today as well, like I show it as well for the audience. So we had today our own report as FEPS as well. We had a big discussion and one graph. So the speaker wasn't there, and I don't know if I can find it now, because it's the only one with some color in it. So here you see it. I don't know if they can see it online, but you see the graph. So what do you spend on AI development? Here's EU AI factories. Do you see the blue? Like probably at home, you cannot even see the blue. And here, what are we talking? We are talking Microsoft OpenAI. That's the biggest one. So that's like, it's at least 100 times more spent. So Europe cannot just like go and do the same. We need to be smart. We need to know, like do something specific, do something focused. And then, but like maybe to wrap it up, because I think like what we cannot discuss now because we are out of time, but we need to do stuff on education, public services. We need to do stuff on healthcare. Do we really want all our healthcare data to be trained on this stuff and be out of our control? We need to do like these core public things that are about the development of our kids, about our health, about like indeed the transition of the ecology. So we need the climate. The climate is gonna be an issue that we need to deal with. So I see more, but maybe that's after a first priority. We need to enlarge it.
It's better. It's not just about of always getting more and more. It's the same thing with the AI race. It's not a matter of getting the European model that has more parameters. That will accelerate the ecological breakdown also. If you push always for more and more.
And faster and smarter and more energy.
But it needs to be clever. It needs to be strategic. It needs to address the uses of the technology, the potential applications of this technology that can definitely empower people and help solve problems. So this is where I think Europe can do different. Yes, no, the AI factories will not match the money that Amazon, Microsoft, Google are putting into this ecosystem, but we'll do it with sufficient money to develop an alternative in areas that are crucial for Europe. And that's the comparison you need to make. The investment in technologies that can solve problems in education compared to how much money they are investing and for what. Again, as I was saying before with education, and this is very, very easy to see, these companies are promoting like simply a replacement of faculty, of teachers, use of more and more digital solutions and less caring and comprehensive ways, holistic ways of approaching education. So really, I think there is a space there to develop another type of technology. It's not, again, a matter of investing more, but investing better.
And I think you just mentioned as well, like replacing teachers by AI, that's also reducing jobs. It's also reducing like the people that we care about.
Reduces demand. So other sectors are also affected.
So this is also the economy. It's really central to our economy, because if these jobs are lost, it's also like a problem. It's also the workers and all of that. And also what I kind of like take on, and we cannot discuss it now, but like you also said, if we create something here, there might be interest of other countries to even like work with us or even use the services. We can even do an export or like help others and create an alternative. Like, it's a worldwide, it's a global thing, because it's only the US that has an interest in this, or China in its own way. But what about Latin America? What about Africa? What about even Southeast Asia? Like, there's a lot of the majority of the world gets anything out of this, and maybe Europe creates something that it can also export. I have to round it up there. I want to thank you very much, Cecilia Rikap from the University College London, of the UCL Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose. Please like follow her, follow also FEPS. The report is online. I think it's just it's free,
on IIPP's
free to
website.
download.
Yes.
I think it's also not the last time that you will publish or speak on this, because I know there's this topic will not go away. Like I said, the AI Factories proposal will come, and we will look at it closely, and we will react on that also from the FEPS side. I want to thank you to listen to the FEPS Talks podcast. Please follow us also on YouTube and on all the different podcast platforms. Subscribe to our newsletter, because we have a lot of content to share, and knowledge is free. We try to help the progressives in Europe with great ideas. And today we had a great bright mind with us, Cecilia Rikap. Once again, thank you, and see you next time.
Thanks to you. Pleasure being here.